People often assume that the hardest part of being in the justice system is going on stand, and it's not. For me, three of the hardest parts of the whole process was making a phone call, attending a Zoom call, and receiving a phone call on a random Friday afternoon. So first and foremost, without question, the hardest part of this whole thing was to report the case to the police initially, that very, very first phone call that I made. Where I was at the time and how much I'd been building up to this particular moment, it was just simply completely overwhelming. And in that moment, you're already grieving because you're sharing something with somebody that's a stranger, and you've probably never shared this particular thing with a stranger before, and that feels very unusual, and it feels very foreign, and it feels quite simply overwhelming. The life that once existed in silence is about to go, and the relationships you have are likely to shift forever in one capacity or another. And I guess the final thing is you're risking other people knowing, which is something, if you're anything like me and you're a historic silent survivor, there will have been a desire to never tell anybody and nobody to ever know. And now you're breaking this, that everything's possible to change. The second hardest part was breaking the news to my family, and in particular, my parents. At the time when I told my parents, I was actually 43. I'm going to do a longer form video on that specifically. And my parents are in their late 70s. And all I could think about was how much it was going to affect them, how much it was going to hurt them. And in real time, I have to watch their pain whilst carrying my own pain whilst we have this conversation. I wasn't just telling them what happened. I was watching them in real time find out, which is a completely different feeling and context, just simply because of the severity of what we're talking about. And it feels very like you almost have to feel like you're the protector. And I know that they wouldn't want me to think in that way, but nobody wants to say or do something that you know is going to rip your parents' heart out. And that was something that I had no choice. At the point when I told them, I had to go through with that exact feeling, and it's very, very uncomfortable. And the whole thing was difficult and heartbreaking from beginning to end in that particular conversation. And finally, I would say the third hardest part of this whole thing was receiving the phone call at 3 o'clock on the Friday when I was due in court on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. After it had already been moved previously, I got at least a week's notice. So I think it was slightly more than a week last time it had been moved. But this time I'd become attached emotionally to the idea that this was finally going to be removed out of my life. I was finally going to be free, that I could start seeing a future where this wasn't looming over me. And then to get that phone call at 3 o'clock on that day to say it'd been moved on 9 months, I just simply didn't know how I was going to get there. I simply didn't know how I was going to find the energy to survive another 9 months, because at that point I'd been in the process close to 5 years. So to then have to deal with another 9 months, it completely sent me into a different place. It's kind of like my nervous system had organized itself around this being something that was going to be gone out of my life. Like my sleep, my sense of self, my thoughts, my anxiety, everything. I could just see like a more comfortable future. And then it just got stripped away from me last minute. That was when it was probably the time when I thought, I don't know if I can do this. I was hanging on by an absolute thread to stay in the game. But there's lots of other things that I'll talk about in other videos of what actually convinced me to stay. But it was very, very difficult. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. People often assume that going on stand is the hardest part. But by the time I went on stand, I'd been in the process for 6 years. I'd gathered a lot more strength. I'd gathered a lot more dedication and motivation. But going on stand is difficult. But compared to the three things that I've mentioned here, then for me, going on stand was a lot easier. I'm sharing these because if you've been through any of these moments, I want you to know that what you felt wasn't a weakness or instability. It was a completely normal and rational response to an immense amount of pressure.